I wanted to tell you that I used to work as a veterinarian's assistant for a few years in a small veterinarian clinic in a far more rural area. I'm not normally from this area, but because I have family close by, I went through some really rough personal times that required me to move in with said family. I ended up working at this place for a number of years. This clinic saw a lot of animals, farm animals, and exotic animals alike. Maybe exotic isn't the right word for it, but more than your typical cat and dog. You see a lot more bigger animals out here than you do in the cities, and we had people bringing in horses and all other sorts of animals. But this is not why I'm writing to you. I wanted to get some background information cleared out of the way before I wrote to you what is really going on. See, I listened to a lot of these dogman encounters that you've posted, and I've heard multiple occasions where cats and dogs alike have gone missing. Same with livestock. But people are not talking about it. It's what it's like to work in my field where you have people working with animals, and they bring these animals into you who have been attacked by said creatures. I've seen some pretty gruesome sightings. Horses, for example, that have been attacked by what I determined to be a very large canine. This one horse, for example, nearly had its jugular vein ripped open, and its back leg was severely ripped open. I'm telling you this now because there's no known predator in the area that attacks the way this did. Because my veterinarian clinic that I worked at is really the only one for miles around. If I give up the location, you could figure it out, and I kind of want to keep it private for the sake of my older employees. I have a lot of respect for them and the hard work they do. I apologize for that, but it's ultimately to protect them. I've seen cats and dogs come in that were nearly mauled to death. In fact, I can remember this one German Shepherd that was brought in recently. She was such a sweetheart, but she was blinded and had her front paws ripped off. Of course, on the job, I couldn't outright say this was a dogman, because there are cougars and black bears, but if you take time to study how these particular predators attack their prey, it's nothing like the way a dogman does. Unfortunately, there is not an in-depth study of how dogmen attack, other than listening to episode after episode of what these things will and can do to animals. Something without a doubt is going on, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of it. Don't think I know this all by myself. I have friends in other veterinarian clinics across the East Coast that we talk, and we talk. Clinics that are in far more rural areas like this one that I work at were prone to situations like this happening. It doesn't stop. This is a real situation that we need to take seriously. If anything, even if you don't believe in the existence of cryptids or dogman, there is some sort of large canid predator out there doing severe damage to these animals. It's showing itself time and time again. Of course, there's always going to be the occasional bear attack, and bears can do a significant amount of damage to an animal. Upon further inspection of the wounds, bite marks, and method of attack, these are without a doubt canid. The only thing that points me is to that whatever reason all these animals are being attacked by a large group of wolves possibly. That doesn't make any sense unless you add in dogmen into the mix, with their population ever growing. There has been a couple of clientele of mine that I've gotten the chance to speak to about their experiences with dogmen, but in my profession, talking about such things would be nonsense to so many. I have to be very careful who I speak to and what I ask them and tell them. There is an older gentleman in his 60s that has some farm animals that he's brought in. They're pretty banged up, and he's a man who has openly told me he's seen some things that I wouldn't probably believe him if he told me. On a personal level, I got him to open up with me, and he's seen these creatures try to take down some of his horses and animals. He doesn't know what to call them, and I haven't brought up the term dogman to him, so he just calls them large wolves. He described them as unforgiving, vicious, and without mercy. They've already claimed the lives of several other of his animals, and he's in the works of moving these horses that I was working with. I'm pretty sure that you want some of the gruesome details, but out of respect for him and myself for having to relive it, I'm not going to go into vivid detail of all the damage that was done. Let's just say that they needed facial reconstruction, and their limbs needed to be sewn back together properly. As of now though, both of his horses are doing great and are making full recoveries in a different area entirely. That's just one client though. Another client not even 20 miles away from the one with the horses had issues with the same supposed creature taking her small dogs. Anyway, had I not known about cryptids and dogmen in general, I would probably have zero clues as to what was going on. At this point, it has to be a dogman. There are no other options. I'm convinced. This happened when I was 14, and I was spending the night at a friend's house. Well, long story short, a bunch of family drama erupted at his house, and their family drama got pretty physically violent. I felt very uncomfortable staying the night, so I just decided that I was going to go walk home, which was only about 4 miles away. Even though it was at 11 p.m., I was 14, and I had no real problems walking home by myself. Besides, I did this all the time. This is where my story turns from domestic abusive depressive to horror story turn reality. On my way home, I began to notice I was being followed. At first I thought it was a person, but then I realized it was something else. I would turn, and I would see it dart behind the trees and cars. At one point, it had a really hard time disguising itself in the shadows because I don't know if it knew any better or what, but this thing looked like a flipping werewolf. I could see a long muzzle and tall pointed ears and the way it was hunched over. It was like this entire time, the entire walk home, this just was keen on following me. But it never got any closer. It stayed a very specific distance behind me and just kept trailing me, hiding every chance it got, watching me. I kept looking over my shoulder constantly, trying to stay aware of all my surroundings. When I got about a mile from my house, I had to cross this back road that goes over this tiny creek and connects to another road. Before I continue my story, if I would have stayed in the neighborhood I was at, it would have taken me an extra 2 whole miles plus to get home, because I would have had to go down a long, busy street, and I just wanted to get home. I was pretty freaked out at this point, but I figured I was walking already at a good pace, and I didn't feel like I was in total doom. At least not yet. This back road, which is more of just a back road curve, doesn't have any houses on it, and there's a little concrete bridge over this creek, and there's virtually no lights. Look, I understand that 14-year-old me was crazy enough to make this decision when I spotted a werewolf-looking creature following me all the way home, but I felt confident that I would make it, and that if anything, I could always run, since I was a pretty good runner. As I'm walking up to this back road curve area, I could see the bridge in sight. I only had a little further to walk, and the noise behind me had stopped. I kept checking behind me real quick, and I didn't see anything following me anymore. And in that moment, I felt a quick snippet of relief. Maybe I had just been dreaming it. Maybe it was a hallucination. However, that relief was quickly washed away when I heard movement in the woods off to the left of me and the right of me. It sounded like there were multiple people coming toward me in my direction, so I decided to double time it, and it scared me because I thought I was going to get mugged. I reached the bridge, and I began to cross over it. I'm still hearing more and more noise following me from the woodline on both sides. Then, as the noise continues, I begin to hear a noise in front of me in the woods to my right. Now, my heart is racing even more than it ever has all night. I was thinking I was going to be ambushed, knifed, and left for dead by a mob of homeless people, or thieves, or God knows what. But the noise never left the woods. It just stayed there, beyond the trees. I began sprinting once I got across this small bridge until I got to another section of the neighborhood that would safely lead me back to where my house was. Looking back, I was expecting to be chased by an angry mob, but I never saw anything or anybody. I wish I could explain what happened to me that night, but I really don't know. I believe I saw something, some sort of monster, I don't believe it was somebody in a costume. It looked far too real. Sometimes I think back to that and wonder if I was just having a strong vision, or again, maybe I was dreaming. I don't know what this is. It was straight up in the realm of horror fiction. That's just how weird I feel my story is. My parents are early birds, so by the time I got home, everybody was already in bed, asleep. That entire night, I felt paranoid, constantly looking out my window. I didn't know if I was being followed, or possibly if these things or people were going to follow me back to my house, or what. I didn't know what to expect. I called my friend as soon as I got back to check up on him, and things I guess had calmed down at his house, even though he wanted to run away because of how bad his home situation was. I didn't have the guts to bring up what happened to me and kind of put his situation down, even though I felt like I was followed. Even just typing this out sounds so silly, but I saw what I did with my own 2 eyes, and I don't take it back. About 4 years later, that same friend hung himself in his closet, right before graduation. I guess his home situation had gotten so bad that nobody realized. Anyway, this story isn't just necessarily about my encounter with the unknown, but in a way, it reminds me of him, paying homage to a good old lost friend. Back in the late 90s, a lady was said to have committed suicide on a portion of highway that borders a swamp-like area, crashing into an oncoming car. I don't know if her suicide has anything to do with my sighting, but the fact that the two coincide together just makes my skin crawl. In place of her death, or the part of her road that she shot off and died, is a memorial. You know, one of those typical sides of the road white crosses adorned in flowers and other memorial-based items. Well, because of my work, I have to drive this 2-lane highway every day, to and from. I've been very fortunate in these times of COVID-19 that my work has actually been steady. In fact, my workload has actually doubled, if not tripled, and so because of that, I've been very fortunate in these times of COVID-19 that my work has actually doubled, if not tripled, because of other people being laid off, and me being kept on. I want to keep what I do anonymous, so I'll leave it at that. But I'll just say that I help businesses create revenue and bring in more clients. Anyway, I was coming back in the evening time. Keep in mind that because it's spring and summer, it doesn't get dark out till super late. So at this point, the sun was just starting to go down, but it was still bright outside. I'm coming up the hill, getting ready to turn, and the lady's memorial is right there on the side of the road. Well, as I'm coming up, my headlights, which by the way I keep on 24/7 because I prefer to practice good driving, they reflected these 2 lights to the side of the road, directly to my right where the memorial is. Because the reflection of light caught my eye, out of reaction, I look over and I see this lizard-looking thing on 2 legs that's looking right at me and my car. What exactly was I looking at? I'm not sure. Was I seeing a real-life alien? Was this somebody in a convincing costume that didn't get the memo that it was not yet Halloween? It had a look on its face like, oh crap, I've been spotted. And I went from doing 45 miles an hour to a slow 15, mouth agape and all. I didn't expect to see whatever this was. It looked to maybe be 4 to 5 feet tall, with a long tail that drug behind it. I thought it was a person in a costume again, but it looked to be just like a lizard man, a real-life lizard man. It was really ugly too. After staring at me for a couple of seconds, as I'm passing, it turns around and jumps right back into the trees where it came from. The longer I spent looking at it, the more I came to the conclusion, more and more, that this was a real animal. If it was a costume, by any stretch of the means, then it was a Hollywood tier makeup and acting job. Why would anybody be out here on the side of the highway dressed up like that? I know people do crazy stuff, especially in this day and age with YouTube and everybody wanting views and fame, but it just seemed to be too far-fetched for me, and this thing looked far too animalistic to be a person. I didn't want to believe that, of course. I wanted to believe it was actually a person. I saw what I saw, and I cannot argue with myself and say that this did not look animalistic. Even the look in its eye had that wild animal look. So, afterwards, I called up my wife immediately and told her what I saw. Because, well, her and I tell each other everything, no matter how crazy. I told her that I was worried, and that I wasn't getting enough sleep, and that I was starting to have visions. What I saw didn't look like a vision, though. It looked like a real flesh and blood, living being. It looked intelligent, and it looked very much kind of like a human does. The stature, the way it carried itself when it walked, everything. It's kept me up at night, that's for sure. And the next few days and evenings, when I would drive past that memorial spot, I kept looking for this thing, to see if I could see what I saw. I never did see it again, and I have no idea what it was that I did see. I'm not even sure how to wrap my mind around it, because it is just so left field for me. It didn't look like a monster, but maybe a lizard that was exposed to radioactivity, that became part human or mutant or something. I know I'm venturing into the realm of comic book reality here, but the thought of it is just so out of the realm of normal. I can't even come up with words to accurately put a picture of what I saw. It was a human reptile that walked just like a man and acted like a man. I find the term lizard man to be the best way to accurately describe this thing. In my earlier 20s, I was an outdoor junkie. I traveled all over the northern United States and even many parts in Canada to see as much as I could. My whole ideology is that life is so short, I don't want to miss what this beautiful earth has to offer me. I had just gotten out of a very toxic relationship for 4 years with a girl that I probably should have never dated. And to put it lightly, the breakup devastated me. So, I wanted to turn my life around and give my time and energy towards being out in nature. That's what really sparked this whole incident. Had none of that ever happened, I wouldn't have had my sightings as I did, and I certainly wouldn't have been at the Algonquin Provincial Park that day. To make a long story short, I sold everything I had, pretty much lived for hitchhiking and walking everywhere I went. It sounds crazy, but emotional turmoil will make you do crazy things, and I wanted to remedy my pain with nature instead of substances and alcohol and things that would make me feel empty. Anyway, enough talk of broken hearts and trying to heal. Let's get on to what happened. I had a sighting of a reptilian-like creature at Algonquin Park in Ontario 5 years ago. I was hiking by myself, and I came to the end of one of this trail. To the right, the trail curves, but there's a sudden drop-off. If you were to fall, it's about a 50 to 60 foot drop. As I'm approaching this drop-off, and before I can even see down, I hear commotion, like something big moving around. At first, I get excited because I think maybe I'm about to see a large bear or something. But I look down, and I see this large reptilian thing running on all fours off into the woods. I had to double take because in my head, I'm thinking, what am I seeing? I wasn't high, I was not drunk, and I certainly was not on acid. I was sober as a honeybee. I was also the only one around because I did a lot of hikes by myself. I looked around to see if there's anybody else around me that I can motion to ask, did you see that too? Unfortunately, I was the only person around me. I stood there, looking out over the small drop-off into the canyon below, if you could even call it a canyon. About a few minutes later, an older man comes walking up the trail and smiles at me and greets me with a friendly hello. I turn to respond to him, but ask him if he's ever seen anything weird up here. He politely says no, and you could tell by the look on his face that he isn't quite sure what I was getting at. I pointed down at the drop-off and said I just saw this weird reptile creature running on all fours like an animal down there, and I wanted to know if you have ever seen such a thing. He shook his head and continued on with his hike. Now, I was struggling with reality. Did I really see that? Well, I let it go in the moment, and I continued on with my hike. Fast forward years later, and I'm telling my friend about it because we got on the topic of seeing strange animals, and he was telling me about his Bigfoot sighting that he had had. I don't believe in Bigfoot, or really anything that challenges the realm of reality that we live in, but I can't refute my experience, and so I was telling him about what happened to me. He told me that I should go check out this YouTube channel called What Lurks Beneath, and that I should submit my story to you. Well, I checked out your channel, and I was blown away to find that you had a series, an entire series at that, dedicated to just reptilian cryptid creatures. I learned so much in just spending a few hours listening to these encounters back to back. Crocodilian men, Komodo dragon-like people, very similar to what some of the creatures that I saw. I guess I'm not crazy after all, and I'm obviously not the only person seeing these types of creatures. Unlike a lot of the encounters you feature on your episodes, mine didn't happen anywhere close to a swamp, to my knowledge, but it did happen out in the open. Then, my story gets even weirder. Before I actually wrote up my story and sent it to you, I learned about these large mounds that apparently reptilians are drawn to, and I didn't even know if they lived underground or not, or if they lived in these mounds, but they seem to be in all these reptilian stories. Well, I reached out to a couple of my friends who have frequently hiked in the Algonquin Provincial Park. I don't know why I didn't think to do this initially when I had my sighting. I reached out to them and asked if they had ever found anything weird in their journey traversing to the park and hiking. This is where my jaw hit the floor. One friend of mine was telling me, which by the way he's a very experienced outdoorsman, but doesn't know anything about cryptids or certainly reptilians. He discovered what he found were really large mounds, about 9 feet tall, just roughly 6.5 miles off trail. I couldn't believe what he was telling me. This was after I listened to several of your reptilian episodes, and I immediately put the two together. I can't believe what I had heard. I had to sit down and process everything all these years later to realize that this was reality, and I actually saw a reptilian being. I never would have thought in a million years they existed, let alone resided in the Algonquin Provincial Park.